where I learned about the real issues within our criminal justice system and what real reform would look like. And so I resigned from that position in 2014 in order to start No Exceptions, which is an organization that was founded by prisoners, ministers, lawyers, and educators, basically. And
so both of you would like to talk about some very, very important things in prison. And I think, Pastor, as you've said on a number of occasions, we know a lot about a person who has been convicted up until the prison wall. And after that, we don't know anything else about them unless we try to keep them in there as long as we possibly can. And so what we'd like to do today, over the next minute and a half that we have in this segment, is to start talking about some of the issues dealing with being incarcerated.
Okay. Well, you know, like I said, as an ex-offender, having spent 5 years of my life incarcerated in the Tennessee State prison system, you know, I can truthfully say that I've experienced slavery, because slavery is legal in the prison system. And they make it legal, they give you a job and they'll pay you 13, 14, 15 cents an hour, you know, way, way, way below minimum wage for anybody. And, you know, and you're at their beck and call for whatever it is they want you to do. And I've experienced that, having been incarcerated, and it's an issue. And it's long been an issue. It's been legislated into this country, into our Constitution here, because, you know, slavery, of course, was abolished, but at the same time, it still lives on in the prison system, because slavery is legal when someone commits a crime. You know, now I agree that people that commit crimes should be punished. When I was a criminal, I committed crimes, I should have been punished.
Okay, and so what we'll do, we'll take our first commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll allow Reverend Alexander to talk about some of the jobs and some of the ways that the money is distributed among prisoners in the system. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
In the laundry. And
prisons would not run without prisoner labor.
Right.
Prisoners participate in their own incarceration.
Let's take this second segment to give us an overview in terms of people going into the system and how they are assigned work and anything that has to do with working people.
Absolutely.
in the prison. Is there some kind of hierarchy?
Well,
is there some kind of how is that done? Do you take an examination to determine where your skills are best, et cetera?
There are different tests required for different sorts of jobs. You know, there are requirements, different skill levels, different abilities. But we can relate that directly to what Pastor Walker was saying about slavery.
Okay.
And so I think there's a tie-in there.
Okay, and so when we come back, we're going to start with you.
Okay.
And that's what I wanted to do, to give you this part of this 8-minute segment.
Okay.
To talk about some of the economics of the prison system and why we can consider it to be a continuation of slavery. You see, and I think when you say that they're paid what, 13 cents an hour.
Yeah. 15
yeah,
cents,
between 13 and 50 cents an hour is the average in Tennessee, but that's not even required.
Thank you and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Walker and Reverend Alexander concerning abolishing slavery, modern day slavery in the state of Tennessee, dealing primarily with the penal system in the state of Tennessee. And Pastor Alexander, let's see if we can have you to give our audience some information in reference to the kind of work that is done in prison and how persons become involved in this work, perhaps how much money is made, whatever you wish to give us, because I think that anything that you might give us is something new to me, you see, and probably much so to our audience. Let's do it from that perspective.
Okay, absolutely. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to connect that to Pastor Walker's statements about slavery, since we're talking about modern slavery. You know, I hope that a lot of your viewers have seen the documentary 13th by Ava DuVernay. It's incredibly important. If they haven't, I would strongly advise them to watch it. It's streaming on Netflix. And what that documentary does so well is it breaks down the prison industrial complex in the United States. And it explains how what we have done is we've moved from a system of slavery to the convict lease system to an era of Jim Crow, and now what we have we call mass incarceration. You know, so how does this continue? How does slavery keep manifesting over and over? And one of the ways is that we've never abolished slavery, right? So, and we think, what? Because we all learned in school, right? The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery, among other things. But actually what it does is that it narrows the category. So the 13th Amendment contains what's known as a criminality clause, which basically reads, if I could just read this for a moment, this is from the Tennessee Constitution, it's the same as the federal. And it says, Article 1, Section 33 of the Tennessee Constitution reads that slavery and involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, are forever prohibited in this state. Now that exception allows for the institution of slavery to still exist. And so...
Except for the...
Exactly, except, yeah, it's abolished except for punishment of a crime.
That is what we're trying to abolish in the state of Tennessee. Yeah,
absolutely, exactly. And so in abolishing this, after watching the documentary of 13th, one of the things that struck me and struck other clergy members and lawyers was that, wait, until language matters, and until you do something about the fact that our own Constitution contemplates and ensures that some form of slavery exists, it will continue to be reborn. It will continue to manifest. So the very simple solution, and it's one that is an active and live bill this session in the Tennessee legislature, is to simply amend that language to take out the criminality clause. So what it would read, it would say that slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited in this state. It's very simple. You know, there's not another Western democracy that abolished slavery that maintained an exception. No one would write this like this today. And so, but as long as you have that, then you can have a system where you want to increase your number of individuals who are incarcerated, because I agree with you, right, Pastor Walker, that there are times when it is necessary to socially segregate someone, but in a system of law, we contemplate that punishment should have an end. But when you're making more money off of the bodies of people, when you have them warehoused, than what they're generating on the street, it creates an incentive to keep people locked away, to be caged, longer. And you know, the economic impact, we can talk about the jobs within the prisons. People work all kinds of jobs. You know, the only way that prisons actually function is through prison labor. Prisoners participate in their own incarceration. They don't have the manpower to keep everyone locked up. I mean, we always have, a horrible time having enough security staff in Tennessee prisons. They're always understaffed, perpetually, and that's true across the country. So how is it we keep people who are really no longer a threat, the vast majority, and who would much rather be at home and could be productive out? How do we keep them in? It's because people are participating, because they don't want to stay in trouble, and they do want to go home one day. And so they work in every aspect of the prison. They cook food, they wash clothes, they clean the buildings, they keep up maintenance, the heating, the air, the water, they paint, they do construction, they perform clerical work, they're clerks. Every place you can imagine, there are prisoners working within a prison system. That's how it continues to go. And so in the state of Tennessee, on average, prisoners will earn something between 17 cents and 55 cents an hour, with some exceptions. But that's not mandatory. So for example, in other southern states like Alabama or Texas or Florida, and I believe even Georgia, prisoners are paid nothing.
You know, and I hate to interrupt there, but that comes to mind in reference to the labor that is there, but who makes a determination as to whether or not that labor shall be used to do certain things, and who makes the decision in terms of that the prisoners should be compensated for what they're doing?
That would be a decision made at the state level, right? So the state of Alabama has chosen not to compensate, but it's not really compensation. And if we're talking about the economic impact, I think we have to go beyond just what a prisoner is making per hour. Think about the economic impact on their family, because the majority of people on the inside have families on the outside. Many times they're married, they have children. You know, you have a lot of single parents on the outside. They're not really single, but their partner's incarcerated. And so they become a quote unquote burden on the system because the other half of that partnership is incarcerated and they can't provide for their families adequately. It destabilizes not just families, but entire communities. You know, and that's another way that it's modern day slavery. It used to be the case if someone did a crime, they would do their time, but then eventually get out and come back into the community. Now with our increased sentencing links that we have, people are incarcerated often permanently or for decades and decades, and what we see now are multiple generations of the same families. And that's when we say it impacts more than just a family, it impacts an entire community. And it has a very adverse economic impact on that entire community.
Yeah.
But when you have things like private prisons, prisons for profit,
Right.
you know, that are making a profit literally and trading flesh on NASDAQ, because that's what's happened. I mean, I don't think we can like try to find a euphemism for this. They're trading in human bodies, you know.
And these private prisons, they compensate, do they compensate prisoners that are incarcerated?
It would depend on the state, and no more so than a state institution. But I mean, think about the economic impact of that. They're making money, right? Who do they owe a fiduciary duty to? Not you or me or the community, to their shareholders.
Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to
making
take
money.
this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Where does the money go?
Into the pockets of shareholders.
Yeah.
One of our chants outside the last time there was a demonstration in front of CCA was, hey, CCA, what's a black man worth today?
Yeah.
Because they're trading them.
Yeah.
It's on,
it's from
you
the
know,
auction block to
straight off the auction block
to the
into
NASDAQ.
the cage.
Yeah.
It's they can rebrand themselves as Core Civic or anything they want, but the bottom line is
that
slave
they
traders.
have access to labor.
Yeah.
They use that labor, and
Yeah.
they are being compensated.
Right.
The prisoners are being compensated at a minimal, whatever they're compensated. But there's a pile of money that goes to the shareholders.
So what happens, is CCA is actually organized as what's called a REIT, a real estate investment trust, which means CCA doesn't pay federal taxes because they move almost all their profits immediately to shareholders. And so, I mean, so not only is this a corporation making money off of human flesh.
And they can also use the money that they make off prisoners in order to build more facilities.
Of course, they have no incentive to offer programs or to help reduce recidivism. They want reoccurring customers.
Make those points, because I mean that's an extraordinary kind of thing that
That's true.
That they're there and they're laborers, and everything that has to be done is done by the prisoners.
Right.
Without a doubt.
And the money that is made. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor Walker and Reverend Alexander in reference to abolishing slavery in the penal system in the state of Tennessee. And of course, Pastor Walker, let's see if we can start off with you by having you to give us some information in reference to how this money flows, and I mean where it starts and because I think very, very few people understand exactly how this operates. We know that they're working there, but
well, first of all, Dr. Haney, you got to realize that technically slavery has not been abolished in the United States of America, because if there's an exception, that means it's still in existence. So slavery is still alive and well in the prison systems, and the incentive is people are making money. You know, you got private prison systems, companies, CCA, Correction Corporation of America, you know, that's funneling people, that are handling people that are being funneled into the prison system. You know, we go from being traded on the auction block to being traded on the NASDAQ now, and all these shareholders stand to benefit. You know, you have to ask yourself a question: who are the shareholders? You know, are the shareholders some of our attorneys or our lawyers or prosecutors, our judges, or the like. You know, some of the shareholders are legislatures. You know, in the Congress and House of Representatives and the Senate. You know, I would venture to say yes. You know, people that go out and get a 401k and they putting money into that thing like that, and then you got people out there investing your money into CCA of America, and here you are, a shareholder in the prison system, and you know you getting dividends from people being enslaved basically in the prison system.
And managing your money.
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
You.
Yeah. So you know it's a serious issue that needs to be looked at and needs to be looked at intensely because it needs to be abolished. It needs to be truly abolished because then if you do that, then you will start to slowly see the dwindling away of the private prisons. You start because there will be no longer any real incentive for them to continue to build these private prison systems because you know there would be no slavery. You know that net will be gone from them. So then it would also diminish the school to prison pipeline. You know all these things are set up by design. You know you've got stories where you got judges that have been tried and convicted for selling people into the prison system because there were shareholders in these private prison companies and stuff like that. And it was to their advantage to sentence somebody to these long sentences. Then you got to think about when these people are passing these bills for, you know, extended sentences for certain things and all this stuff like that. What's really behind that? What's the driving force? Is it because crime is running so rampant, or is it because there's an economical advantage to doing something like that? I would venture to say it's economics.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely is economics. And I think that there's a point that's really important to make here, and that is, so this bill that we talked about that's live in the session, the sponsor for this bill in the House is Representative Joe Towns out of Memphis, who's just a tremendous asset, I think, to our General Assembly. And this is a great bill that he's sponsoring. And one objection may be, well, wait a minute, if we amend this in the Tennessee Constitution, does that mean we close all the prisons and everybody just leaves? No. Because Article 1, Section 32 of the Tennessee Constitution allows for the creation and maintenance of safe and humane prisons in the state of Tennessee. Now, what I would argue, and I'm sure Pastor Walker would argue, is that they are neither safe nor humane. But what this does mean is that if Representative Towns' bill passes, prisoners will still be prisoners, but by God, they won't be slaves. You know, and I think from a faith perspective, and from a political perspective, regardless of what side of the aisle someone sits on, slavery is simply indefensible in this state.
And
in any state
what
in the
about,
country.
Is there some kind of mass movement that is underway in reference to trying to deal with this as a problem? And I think you mentioned the fact that some states compensate prisoners and some states don't, and et cetera. Is there any kind of movement that will attempt to abolish not only slavery in Tennessee, but abolish slavery in the prison system as slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment to the Constitution?
Right, well, I think to the extent there is a mass movement exists in that we've seen a real shift in the national conversation about mass incarceration and about the fact that while incarceration for periods of time may be defensible, mass incarceration is not. And that mood has certainly shifted. So when people ask me sometimes, am I in despair or pessimistic since the election? Because of course CCA or Core Civic, whatever they want to brand themselves, their stocks were down prior to Trump being elected. And of course, as soon as he got elected, they shot right back up again. No, we are. In
anticipation of what?
That he would, of course, want to increase privatization. So the feds had issued indications that they were going to pull out the private prison business, that there was no indication that they actually saved money, which they don't, which may be another discussion for another show. But also they certainly aren't as safe and aren't as well run. But we're not pessimistic because 85% of prisons are state prisons, not federal. And this is an issue that criminal justice reform is a really big deal right now across this country because the way things have been occurring since the mid-90s, it doesn't make economic sense. It's not good policy. It doesn't make communities safer. It's not realistic about issues like recidivism. And as we said before, it is destroying communities. And so
Well, it seems that the
Right.
only visible thing is that it's making a lot of people a lot of money.
Well, it is making
you
a lot
say
of people a lot of money.
incarceration. Now, that's a very, very expensive,
It is expensive.
situation, and it brings in a lot of money.
Right.
And they're using just a minimal amount of that money for the upkeep and the running of the prisons.
Right.
Is that?
Well, it's certainly not being spent on food that's edible. It's definitely not being spent on health care. I mean, one of the things we did was we worked to organize a lawsuit concerning hepatitis C, which is being untreated, basically, in Tennessee prisons. When we filed that suit, there are almost 3,500 prisoners that the system knew about who had hepatitis C, and 8 were receiving treatment at the time. I mean,
Wow.
so, I mean, they're certainly not providing for programs to reduce recidivism because, okay, let's say you work at a core civic prison. Let's say you work for a private prison. What is your incentive to actually introduce good quality programming? What's your incentive to keep families together? What's your incentive to try to help encourage visitation instead of prohibit visitation? What's your incentive to really want to make sure that person doesn't come back? You don't have any incentive because I promise you, you have shares in the corporation that you work for. I mean, this is common sense.
And the only incentive is to bring more people
Of
in,
course.
because the more people you bring in and
Of
paying them
course.
at 13 cents an hour.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
$13. I'm leaning toward 13. 13 cents an hour. That's no compensation at all.
And the guys are reaching out to get those jobs because it gives you an opportunity to get out of the cell and to be active, you know, to move around and stuff.
Either
like
you
that.
become involved in some kind of some labor kind of activity, or you sit in your cell all day.
Yeah.
Is that? Are you given that choice?
Pretty much sitting around doing too much of nothing, you know.
Well, you also have the choice to not work, and if you choose not to work, then you're written up for disciplinary, right? And then you go to solitary confinement, which your mental health then begins to deteriorate.
And so you're really forced to, in a real sense,
Sure.
to work in a prison,
Sure.
some kind of employment. Every person in prison has some kind of employment. Is that true?
Well, no, not every person because there aren't enough jobs. But people would prefer to be active, right? Anyone who thinks that prisoners have it easy, what is it, 3 hots and a
Yeah,
cot,
right.
are completely disconnected from the reality of the prison system today.
For sure.
But do we have time? We've got this, we're talking about prison reform. There are a number of very good reform bills and sponsored by Republicans, not just Democrats, but by Republicans in the Tennessee legislature this session. So there is reason to be optimistic. You know, and we've got trainings happening in Nashville, training people to be citizen lobbyists, because all of your viewers have a power to affect their government. The General Assembly in this state is accessible.